That's lovely. Oh, I see it.
Welcome, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started so that we can start and finish on time. Just a few housekeeping issues. If you have mobile phone or pagers, if you could set them to silent. If you need to use the restrooms, they're out the back doors and to your left. And with that, welcome to the Medical Society of Delaware. My name is Preyas Taylor. I am the president of the Medical Society of Delaware, and I'm also a nephrologist practicing in our great state. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the Medical Society of Delaware for the fifth in a series of healthcare spending benchmark summits. For several months, many in this room have been dutifully attending these summits, learning valuable and interesting tactics and measures that other states, hospitals, and healthcare providers have been implementing. The goal through these summits is, of course, to make healthcare in Delaware more affordable, accessible, and sustainable. As we wind down in this process, we look forward to the next stage when it will be time to consider all that has been presented and all we have learned at these summits. It will be time to formulate an impactful and long-lasting plan that will transform Delaware's healthcare system from a costly system to one that effectively reduces spending while producing healthier Delawareans. The benchmarking process would not be possible without the hard work and dedication of Secretary Odom Walker and her team, and all the stakeholders here in this room and watching online. So thank you also to our valued speakers who have given up their time today to be with us. And on behalf of the Medical Society of Delaware, we look forward to the next stage in solving our state's medical challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor, and thanks everyone for being here. As Dr. Taylor said, this is the last in a series of summits that have been intended to inform and engage all stakeholders in accelerating the new path towards payment reform. The healthcare spending benchmark is a goal for lowering healthcare spending and a tool for monitoring total healthcare costs and growing of costs through enhanced transparency and increased efficiencies. We recognize that there are numerous sub-strategies that support the planning and implementation of a benchmark, as well as to effect broad healthcare and payment reform. And through these summits, we have been presented with a wealth of information to help direct a path forward in achieving meaningful payment reform. Today, we will hear and learn from our speakers about their experiences in structuring the governance and authority that is necessary to implement and monitor and enhance a healthcare spending benchmark in Delaware. And this is a critical element. After working towards setting a solid foundation for healthcare transformation in Delaware, DCHI's role is changing. And in that new phase, we agreed that having an active dialogue related to governance is essential. Our focus today is on understanding the elements of effective governance structure that are necessary to accelerate and drive payment reform, using the benchmark as a critical frame or tool. The right structure is needed from the start, and this is an opportunity to understand what has worked and what has not worked. In that effort, I welcome our speakers and you as attendees. A special thanks to the Medical Society, Dr. Taylor and Mark Thompson for the use of this facility. For some housekeeping, I will say we are streaming live on Facebook. We'd love people to distribute that and make sure that we get everybody involved in the conversation. We have a time element today, so we're going to be juggling time on Q&A as each of the speakers comes up. We do have potentially a break if things are working in that direction. So I'm going to go through and give a brief bio on each of the speakers, and then I'll invite the first speaker up, and we'll be able to follow my lead on how many questions we can get in, after each one of those. So our first speaker is Mark Larson, former Medicaid Director for the state of Vermont. He's Vice President of Policy at the Center for Healthcare Strategies. In this role, he guides CHCS's leadership and capacity building programs aimed to ensure that state leaders have the skills, expertise, and tools necessary to achieve Medicaid's potential. He plays a key role in CHCS's Medicaid Leadership Institute, providing leadership training for Medicaid directors across the country, and he oversees a series of state-based policy and leadership training academies for the state Medicaid staff, including current academies in California, New Hampshire, New Jersey, and Vermont. Then we'll hear from David Seltz, who has already visited us in a prior forum, and we're excited to hear more. He's the first executive director of the Massachusetts Health Policy Commission. The Massachusetts Health Policy Commission is an independent state agency that develops policy to reduce healthcare cost growth and improve the quality of patient care. HPC's mission is to advance a more transparent, accountable, and innovative healthcare system through its independent policy leadership and investment programs. HPC's goal is better health and better care at lower cost all across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And finally, we'll hear from Dr. Bruce Goldberg, who's currently professor at Oregon Health and Science University at Portland State University School of Public Health. He has devoted his professional career to improving the organization, delivery, and financing of health services, particularly to vulnerable populations. Bruce served 2 Oregon governors as the director of Oregon Office for Health Policy and Research from 2003 to 2005, director of the Oregon Department of Human Services from 2005 through 2011, and then was the founding director of the Oregon Health Authority from 2011 through 2013. So we welcome all 3 speakers. We'll start with Mark Larson. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's wonderful. I was commenting about how nice you've made Delaware weather here in November. It's lovely, warmer than Vermont. Again, my name is Mark Larson. I currently work for the Center for Healthcare Strategies, but that actually isn't as directly related. My personal history with this topic, I was chair of the Health Care Committee in the Vermont Legislature and the House of Representatives during the time that Vermont passed Act 48, which was our creation of our health benefit exchange, the Green Mountain Care Board, and our attempt at universal coverage called Green Mountain Care. And most relevant for today's discussion is our work around the Green Mountain Care Board. I also then became commissioner of the Department of Vermont Health Access, which is our Medicaid agency in Vermont, and now serve in the role that I am. My hope today, in the time that we have, is to talk a little bit about the background for the creation of the Green Mountain Care Board, and hopefully draw some parallels to the work that you're doing in looking at governance structures here, then talk a little bit about the role of the Green Mountain Care Board. I'm aware that Robin Lunge has been here, and Dr. Craig Jones to talk some about Vermont's efforts, so I will present this primarily in the context of an update and reminder, and then talk about some of the key considerations that we had when we were creating the board through legislation, and then share a couple of thoughts about some lessons learned in that process. Having read some of the documents related to your efforts around the benchmark, they're not dissimilar to the conversations we were having in Vermont during the creation of the Green Mountain Care Board. And I'll say that at that time, a lot of the focus was around our efforts related to single payer, but really that was a consideration, but in all circumstances, much of the dialogue about why we were interested in making change was consistent. I went back and looked at some of our spreadsheets and diagrams and charts and graphs at the time, and we were in a period where over the course of 6 years, our total healthcare expenditures in Vermont had grown by 50%. And when we look at that projection moving forward, we faced the reality that healthcare expenditures were easily exceeding any cost index that you could come up with. They were easily viewed as one of the biggest pressures within our state budget, and town budgets, and family budgets, and business spreadsheets across the board. And that we weren't going to be able to sustain that growth rate going forward. And at some point, we needed to come up with some strategy for trying to govern that health expenditure at the state level. And by that, I don't mean that by state government, but we are a small state. We have a fairly non-competitive healthcare delivery system. Vermonters access basically one system of care, and we needed some way to figure out how do we get the most from that at a cost that we could afford. Despite some of our national attention for good health outcomes, we knew that we needed to do better, and particularly for certain populations. We had parts of the state that certainly didn't see the same outcomes as other parts of the state, and we had populations that didn't see the quality and outcomes that we would want to see for them. And so it wasn't simply about cost, it was also connected to quality, although very honestly, cost was a big driving concern. And then we had a lot of things going on. Folks may know about the Blueprint for Health. I think you've heard from Dr. Jones about the Blueprint. Really good, wonderful things. But at some point, we were concerned about, is there alignment with all these efforts? And where does that alignment come from? All of those three factors were really drivers for our consideration of a governance system that gave us an opportunity to do better than we thought we were currently doing. This comes straight out of Act 48 that created the Green Mountain Care Board. It talks about the intent in terms of improving health of the population, reducing per capita rate of growth and expenditures, enhancing patient and healthcare professional experience, which for us in writing it was an important statement that we really did want both. And as much as there was concern on the context of providers about, what is this going to mean, we really did want to improve the experience of providers as well as consumers. We wanted to make sure that we could retain and recruit a workforce that wanted to be in Vermont and wanted to serve Vermonters. And then we wanted things to be simpler in the long run. I took this from a presentation that some of you may have participated in before. You can break some of the responsibilities and duties of the Green Mountain Care Board into three areas: regulation, innovation, and evaluation. And this includes in the regulatory arena looking at health insurer rates and rules, hospital budgets, our CON process, our overall health expenditure analysis, implementation of alternative payment models and payment reforms, and oversight now of our ACO models. On the innovation side, they are responsible for overseeing our payment reform efforts and delivery system reform efforts, at building a data infrastructure and helping us develop information that guides our decisions moving forward, payer policy and ACO agreements. And then the evaluation piece. And it may be helpful to see that in many cases, we had somebody doing many of these functions before the Green Mountain Care Board. And in particular, I'll point out that we had a division of state government called the Division of Banking, Insurance, Securities, and Healthcare Administration, which we refer to as BISHCA. And BISHCA, in all of those duties, had responsibility for insurance rate review, had responsibility for overseeing hospital budgets, had the statewide expenditure analysis and the CON process, and oversaw our all-payer claims database. So it was doing a fair amount. And you can see that some of those functions then flowed through or over to the Green Mountain Care Board when we created it. And some of them came as a whole, and some of them came with modification. So for example, I'll point out our rate review process. The Green Mountain Care Board still receives a recommendation from what was BISHCA. It's now called our Department of Financial Regulations, DFR. They still do the solvency consideration in rate review. The Green Mountain Care Board then takes that recommendation, reviews it, but with a new lens around affordability and public good. And so they add a layer to that pre-existing rate review process that is accomplished within the parameters of the Green Mountain Care Board, and then they make final approval of rates. Similar with hospital budgets, the process now flows through the Green Mountain Care Board, somewhat consistent with what was happening before, but now with a greater systemic lens for what does that budget mean in the context of serving Vermonters and the context of affordability. And then CON, All Payer Claims Database, those things just came down as they were. So I realized that there are differences. We don't have an elected insurance commissioner in Vermont. That was all within state government as part of the executive branch appointed by the governor. So there are appreciated differences. But what we did is we tried to look at what were the existing functions, which were the ones that made sense to pull into the Green Mountain Care Board, and were there changes when we pulled them in. I'll highlight this later, but part of what we were considering in terms of which roles to keep and which roles to leave was this notion of how do you align the policy development and the regulatory responsibility. We had a model in Vermont of our public service board, which oversees utilities, where we have a public service department and we have a public service board. The department is really the policy place where policy is developed, and the board is really where the regulatory decisions are made. And we thought a lot about at what points does the policy want to be separate from the regulator, and at what point do you want them to be together? We had a state innovation model that came right on the kind of concurrent to the creation of the Green Mountain Care Board, and I'll just highlight some of the function that the SIM grant played for us. It really pushed us in this realm of looking at alignment across payment and delivery system reform efforts. It supported investments around our infrastructure, like our HIT systems. It created a vehicle for the public-private partnership that was so important to our efforts in moving forward in reform, and created a place for public engagement. Many of the things that our BISHCA had done before felt for many people like they went into a dark hole, and then at some other point they came out. And people didn't understand them, they didn't know where they could engage in them. And both our SIM grant and the creation of the Green Mountain Care Board really intended to create an environment where people not only knew where things were happening, but they knew how they could participate in them. And in that context, it created a forum for ideally building consensus, or maybe at other times simply resolving conflict. And I don't mention it here, but I probably should, that one of the things that it forced us to do is also deal with conflicts of interest. When making decisions, how do you bring out into the open when participants actually may have some sort of a conflict in that decision? So at the time that I was in the legislature and we were dealing with our reform bill, these are a couple of questions that we really struggled with that I hope may be helpful in your considerations. Again, I'll go back to that notion of the relationship between the policy development and the regulation. There's the who sets the policy and then who evaluates decisions based on those policies. We spent a lot of time looking specifically at this notion of the difference between an independent body versus a representative body. As we talked more about this, there was a really strong push in writing the legislation, and proposals would come in on a regular basis about, isn't it important that so-and-so is at the table and is a member of that board? And we really pushed back because the notion was that the board was going to be the place that we had coherent oversight over the entire system that served Vermonters. And we had some prior history where representative boards got bogged down to a point of inefficiency. And we really wanted to maintain an independent board that could make decisions that were in the best interest of the state and the system and Vermonters, and where folks were responsible not for representing some entity, but were really responsible for looking at the whole. And so that was a really key decision. We drew example from the Maryland Hospital Board, as well as our Vermont Public Service Board, in the push for why independence was so important. And that theme then bled through to a number of other factors or considerations. How big should it be? And we had lengthy conversations about 3, 5, 7. It's got to be odd. It can't be even. Bigger is good because it's more trustworthy that there's more people to be accountable. But big is hard and cumbersome and can get bogged down. And frankly, big costs more than small. And we went around and around and around, actually never changing 5. As much as people argued about it, 5 became our number because it was not so small and it was not so big, and it was odd. And then we went around and around on, well, should there be specific criteria or conditions about the makeup? Should it have to include a practicing provider? Should it have to include a certain set of skills? Should it have, and we really eventually said, no, it shouldn't. It is 5, and we want it to be representative on some level, but we're not going to put that into regulation. What we did do is a couple of things that are the next bullets. First, we struggled with, well, how long do you want them to serve? It became a key consideration in terms of how do you maintain independence. We wanted people to be appointed to serve and then have a long enough period of a term that they could actually think without worrying about reappointment or the next step, that they could actually do something. We also recognize that getting things done in this arena takes time, and if you were constantly turning members, that they wouldn't have the time period to actually play out the kind of work that they wanted to see, and that some of this stuff is really technical, and that it's going to take them some time to develop the expertise to do it. And if you were then off by the time you had just learned that, we wasted that investment. So we eventually came down with 7 years because it was long, but not too long. I mean, the same kind of conversation. For those of you who have been around legislatures, you know the science to this process, right? And somebody said 7, somebody said, well, no, 4, and then somebody says, well, you know, and we stuck with 7. Also, important to that, we determined that the board members would only be removed for cause. Again, that notion of creating their ability to think for the system without worrying about political ramification. There's always politics to these conversations, but we wanted them to be somewhat insulated from that. And so certainly we wanted to be able to remove people if there was a reason, but we didn't want them to have in their back of their minds concern for other reasons that somebody might come after them trying to get them off. And then in terms of getting public support for a board that seemed well qualified, we modeled off our judicial nominating system, where there's a process where people are not, they apply, they go through a screening with a nominating committee, The nominating committee's job is basically to determine that these folks are qualified. They could do the job. Those names are then passed on to the governor. The governor makes an appointment. The appointment is confirmed by our Senate. For us, that was in Vermont a trusted process that had stood the test of time, that we felt like if we could draw from that, it again added to the independence, it added to the ability of the board members to be able to perform their governing role in a way that they felt like they had some security once they got through that process. And then funding and staffing remained an ongoing question. We took a lot of staff from Bishka, moved them to the board. We took a lot of money for that staffing and moved it to the board. And this has been one of the areas that has played itself out most over the course of time. What are the right resources that they needed to be able to do the job well? And what's the right staffing level? We all know that in state governments, how many positions becomes one of the central discussions about budgets and funding, but we worked it out. So a couple lessons learned. One, while it may feel daunting, it actually is possible. We actually did it, and it is now working, and you can look back in Vermont over the past couple of years and see where the board's role has made a difference in our state. And so it really is possible. The independence really mattered. There are numerous examples of where the board has made decisions that probably wouldn't have been made otherwise if they didn't have that ability to be an independent body like we've set it up to be. It's really important that we set them up to be folks who look at the system and can see across the silos, that they're not stuck in the individual levels. I think what is happening now at the board is how do you also get that not just from the board members, but from staff? Because many staff have come up in looking at their swim lane in terms of I do CON process, I do rate review, and getting them to see it from a systemic point of view like the board is supposed to, also important. Everything is a working process, right? Everything changes over the time, but it's important to start from the strongest position possible. Giving them the biggest opportunity to start from a good place seemed really important. And then openness is really an essential asset of our board, and it's really hard. Making things open to the public, being able to have a place that can be that place where these decisions get hashed out for the state takes time. You have to build it into timelines. You have to build it into your resource plan. I believe my time is up, so I'll stop there.
So stay. You timed that perfectly. We do have some time for Q&A for a couple of questions. We'll keep it short. Is there anybody that has something right out of the gates? Wow. So why don't we, and it's on the left side of the room too. You guys need to wake up. Why don't we start over here? Let's try to keep it brief though, so we can get as many.
Question with the application process. Did individuals during the application process have to say what party they were affiliated with and when they voted?
No. Folks who apply do not have to do any statement about party affiliation.
I have two. What is the mix of for-profit versus non-profit hospitals in Vermont? And then secondly, has there been any cases since the board came into being where their decision has been overruled by either the legislature or the governor's apparatus?
So we have no mix. We have no for-profit hospitals in Vermont. And I believe that the board's track record is quite good at not having its decisions overturned by either a judicial or political process. I think they've been very mindful of that. And they, while their responsibilities have remained consistent for the most part, the ACO piece is maybe the newest piece that's been added in. I think they've been careful at making decisions that grew with their awareness and strengths so that they could maintain that good track record of not losing cases.
Yeah, hi, Wayne Smith. I'm the hospital guy in the state. Thanks for your presentation. This has been in effect two years, is it, or going on 2 years?
So the Green Mountain Care Board was created in 2013.
2013, okay, a little longer.
And so a little bit longer than that.
Question for you. What unintended consequences have developed or are developing?
Unintended consequences. So I'm thinking, we recently had a conversation about Ford sets hospital budgets. We had hospitals that had more revenue than they expected. It prompted a very vigorous debate about should those dollars go back to premium payers, or should they be invested in community resources that help people be healthy? One of the things that I think we missed in that debating back and forth, which became quite vigorous, was that we wouldn't have had that debate if there wasn't a transparent process for people to even know that there was something to debate about. And I don't know that people understood that as an intent, so I don't know if it's an unintended consequence, but I think it's something that we really come to understand on a deeper and deeper level. What does it mean when we put the system to be more transparent to the average person? People then have weird things to say about it, right? And that's unpredictable.
I'm inferring from your remarks that once the budget's approved, that a hospital or other provider does not have a right to anything or in excess of that, or?
They have to come back and present again to have that budget updated.
And also, real quick, if I may, is it just hospitals or is it other providers, physician groups?
So the Green Mountain Care Board does have broad provider rate setting ability. They have not used that broadly, though, beyond their hospital budget process.
It's no secret that we're talking about this because we're paying the third highest in healthcare costs in the entire country. And I'm so forgetful, I don't remember where Vermont is now. And then the follow-up to that is, did this change the trajectory on your spending in some way that you find notable and you say, clearly this drove this spending down?
Yeah, I think that we can look at tangible topics like insurance rate increases have been lower because of the Green Mountain Care Board's review. In terms of overall system costs, a little bit harder to quantify in terms of the board's responsibility. But what has happened is that it has really driven, I think, our broader payment and delivery system reform, and some may have heard about Vermont's all-payer model that we're working on right now. I think that has been driven faster because of the role of the board. And again, the notion that there's much more focus on total system costs. We're not competing with you at number 3 in terms of per capita spending, but in terms of our ability to afford the growth, I'm not sure we have to be on that list to be able to say we can't keep up with that.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your presentation. My name is Irene Waldron, and I am the Executive Director of the Delaware affiliate of the American Healthcare Association, representing the long-term care continuum across the state. I've heard of you from my counterpart in Vermont. It's nice to meet you. My question has to do with the CON process, and I'm very curious to know how that shifted since the inception of the Green Mountain Board.
So it hasn't shifted so much in practice yet, but it has in dialogue. Because as we have moved with the board's direction towards more of a system-wide approach to payment and delivery system reform, that focus on paying for quality and outcomes has led people to say, well then, do we really need to then approve expenditures through something like CON, or does it alleviate the need for that process? And I think we're kind of in this in-between state where we haven't fully implemented the payment reform models, and we still have some of those expenditures that you have to deal with, so we're kind of in between.
I have one follow-up. In Vermont, is your CON process, which is a certificate of public review in Delaware,
Yeah.
does it use a methodology around bed need that's calculated by a special formula, or how do you do that in Vermont at this time? Thank you.
I don't know if it's grounded in specifically an assessment of bed need. I think it's more a review of whether the investment serves the public good.
Yes, hi, I'm Mark Thompson. If Wayne's known as the hospital guy, I'm known as the physician guy.
Awesome.
Welcome here to Delaware. Quick question. So what impact, if any, has this had on the state's ability to recruit and retain physicians?
You can make that case in any direction you want, I believe, and people have. I think some have raised concern that this is going to drive providers away. Other people have argued that this is creating a system, and by this, I'm going to say not just the board, but the whole effort driven by the board to reform how we pay for and deliver services to Vermonters. That it actually, if we achieve the goal of simplification, administrative simplification, and focus on the provider experience, that it is creating the kind of place where people want to practice. And so we still see some providers leave, we still see some providers come, and people will make their own arguments about what's related to each one of those.
So regarding the development of the board, if you could just maybe describe a little bit about the nominating process and vetting, and who actually controls that. You're careful to keep the independence of the board.
Yeah.
How do you keep the politics out of the nominating process?
Sure. So anybody is able to apply when there's an open position. There is a nominating review committee made up by the appointment of the governor and the speaker and the president pro tem. That board then reviews each application, including interviews. Again, the key piece is that their review is this candidate qualified to serve on the board? So they're not making a recommendation that this person should be appointed, that person should be appointed. They are providing to the governor, we believe that these people are qualified to be on the board. And then again, the governor makes an appointment that has to be confirmed by the Senate.
I'm going to take the prerogative of moderator final question before we let Mark go. I wanted to ask about community engagement. You talked about the public engagement process, but one of the hallmarks of the work we've done here is the broader stakeholder group in the business community, higher education, hospitals, private practices, insurers, everyone around the table. How does the board engage with that level of discussion beyond just a regulatory oversight relationship? How do they engage? What mechanisms are in place for that?
So I believe in statute, we actually require the board to have two advisory committees, one of consumers and one of providers, with the notion that they have to have some structured input. And then again, going back to what started through our SIM grant, was a very complex web of work groups related to any number of topics that provided a public-private opportunity for people to engage in, again, a series of topics related to the board's activities. And then we also ensured that board meetings are subject to our open meeting laws. So people just know when they occur and can have the ability to participate.
Okay. Thank you, Mark, for that. I'll next welcome once again to the podium here in Delaware, David Sells.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is really a pleasure to be back here in Delaware talking about this topic with all of you and sharing my perspective. And I guess I just want to first say congratulations on all of the progress you are making on this really important topic. And I really want to commend all of the leadership of this state for doing this in such a deliberative process in bringing and engaging the community around how to create a more affordable and sustainable healthcare system here in Delaware. And I just want to commend it and thank you. I guess also want to thank the Medical Society for hosting Matt, Secretary Walker, and I think what you're going to hear from me is a little bit of a variation on the same story. And I guess one thing I would say at the beginning is you're going to hear from 3 states, and we all did this a little bit differently. There's no one right way to do this. And I'm a big believer in states being the laboratory. So however you decide how to move this forward, tailor it to your own state, to your own priorities, to your own stakeholders, but also learn from other states, because I do think that there is absolutely some lessons to be learned as you put this together. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Massachusetts story here and the Health Policy Commission, which I'm the executive director of this agency that was established in 2012 as a brand new state agency overseeing healthcare cost containment efforts in Massachusetts. Backing up a little bit earlier than that, Massachusetts, we pride ourselves on being nation leaders on so many different things, and especially in healthcare. In 2006, we passed a landmark healthcare reform access law with the goal of making sure that every resident in Massachusetts had access to affordable health insurance. That law became, of course, the model for the Affordable Care Act 4 years later. But after we passed the access law, policymakers were really focused on how do we make this promise sustainable for the long term. Having said that access to health insurance is a right for our citizens, how can we make sure that we can afford that over the long term? And in Massachusetts during this time, and especially throughout the 2000s, our healthcare spending was growing at a very rapid pace. And by 2009, we had the highest per capita healthcare costs of any state in the country. And as we all know, the United States has the highest per capita healthcare costs of basically any developed country. So Massachusetts was the most expensive place on the planet to get healthcare in 2009. And the same impetus that you heard about before in terms of what brought us to this effort around healthcare cost containment was that crowding out effect. The crowding out effect that we saw in state government, where we were spending over a decade, basically, we spent 60% more on healthcare in our state budget and less on a per dollar amount for transportation, for education, for mental health services in our state budget. And of course, same story for our businesses and employers having to make decisions about being able to hire someone or give someone a wage increase or being able to maintain good health insurance coverage for their employees. And of course, down to families who were seeing what little wage growth that they were getting through their jobs going completely out of their pocketbook in the form of higher premiums, deductibles, and copays. So this crowding out effect really became the impetus for us to say, let's chart a new path. And the legislature, and I worked, just as a bit of background, I worked in the state legislature during this time, so was a part of the bill development process. And there was a lot of talk at the time about potentially even moving towards rate setting and setting up something that was going to be really a regulatory approach. And ultimately, the legislature kind of walked up to the cliff, looked over that edge, and then backed away. And really our reform effort is about making our healthcare market work better in Massachusetts, strengthening that private market, not in a government takeover type of way. And we don't have the same type of regulatory authority that even Vermont does, and that was just discussed. So we passed in 2012 another landmark bill. It was, I think, over 350 pages. It was the last bill that was basically passed it during our formal sessions. It was larger than both of our state budgets combined. It was a comprehensive piece of legislation. And as you can see here, here's all of our state leaders joining together. It was a bipartisan bill, although our governor and the state legislature at the time were controlled by the Democrats. The Republicans who were in the legislature did also vote for this bill. And it was called an act improving the quality of health care and reducing costs through increased transparency, efficiency, and innovation. Doesn't that sound great? I mean, you can't argue with that at all. The law has a number of big goals attached to it, and they're exactly the same goals that Ron was just talking about. Transforming the way that we deliver care. Moving away from a fragmented healthcare system to one that's more coordinated, that's integrated, that puts together both the medical and the behavioral health care, and really is following patients from all the different settings of care, from the primary care to the hospital to the skilled nursing facility and back to home, and having the information and care really be patient-centered. The second was around how we change how we pay for that care. So moving away from the traditional fee-for-service model, you pay for volume, you pay for acuity, and moving towards paying for value. Moving towards paying for the quality and rewarding providers for keeping their patients healthy and out of the hospital. So moving towards more what we call alternative payment methodologies that really create the incentives for providers to do the right thing for their patients and not just continue to provide more and more and more healthcare services. The third was around our healthcare market. And again, we still rely on private negotiations between our insurance companies and our hospitals and providers to set their reimbursement rates. But we do know that in many cases, those reimbursement rates are not necessarily tied to the quality of care that those providers are providing, but rather due to their size, their market leverage. And so we wanted to make our market work better and actually reward the providers who are providing great value. And then finally, a real goal around more information. I use the word purchasers here. That's really kind of code for employers and consumers to say, how can we get real-time information into the hands of these decision makers about where they seek their care, what that care could be, and provide much more transparency in terms of the price and quality of care being delivered. All of these strategies are kind of underneath the surface, and they're all working together towards our goal. And our goal here is a healthcare cost growth benchmark. This is kind of the organizing principle of our entire effort. This benchmark is set basically tied to the long-term growth of our state's economy. And so again, the goal here was to say, let's limit this crowding out effect that we had been seeing going on. Still growth. Of course, growth. We need to be able to invest in our important healthcare system, but maybe not at the same rate that it was growing at the same before, and to create a more sustainable rate. Importantly, this is an all-in measure. This is Medicare, commercial spending, Medicaid spending, and it also includes the out-of-pocket spending that patients and consumers contribute towards our healthcare system. And really the reason why we wanted this to be all in is because everyone who knows and has worked in healthcare, if you just push down in one area, it's inevitably going to pop up in some other area. So we needed to have a full, comprehensive view of healthcare spending in Massachusetts. This is just another slide, a little bit about how that target is set. As I mentioned, it's tied to an economic term called potential gross state product. Essentially, it's a long-term goal of the state's economy. It was initially set in law at 3.6%, and then there's actually a process every year where that's updated. And we have a process in Massachusetts where the administration and the legislature decide together, basically at the beginning of every year, what they think the revenue growth, the tax revenue growth is going to be. And so that statute was amended, added an additional responsibility that the legislature and the administration every year will update what this target is. Since it is really supposed to be a long-term growth target, it may not surprise you that it is maintained and has maintained at 3.6%. So every year they do look at the economic data underneath that, have the opportunity to update it, but they kept it at 3.6% over the last 5 years. So to help the state be able to track and monitor our ability to hit these benchmarks and to succeed in the goals that I laid out before, there was 2 state agencies that were established in this law. The first is called the Center for Health Information and Analysis, and it has a great acronym, CHIA. And this state entity was actually an entity that already existed. So this was not a new state government entity. It was previously called the Division of Healthcare Finance and Policy. It was an executive branch agency. It moved to become a little bit more of an independent agency, but really was an agency that already was there and had staff and operations. And the other agency that was created was the Health Policy Commission. And this was created from scratch, and there was no kind of existing infrastructure. I was the first employee of the Health Policy Commission. I had to figure out how to order computers and fax machines and copiers and office space. And so really a startup in a lot of ways. And the division between our 2 state agencies, and we work extremely close together, is that CHIA is really the data hub for the Commonwealth. They collect a tremendous amount of information from our health insurers, our hospitals, our physicians, and take that data in, clean it, and analyze it to be able to make that data available, not just for the Health Policy Commission, but for the states as a whole and many other state agencies. But really just a data hub. And the Health Policy Commission is the policy hub. And this is the place where we take that data, interpret it, and be able to make policy recommendations from it that can help us achieve our overall goals and help us hit the benchmark. So I'll talk a little bit in detail about the Health Policy Commission. I think it's most relevant, obviously, to your conversation. I think as I was being introduced, you heard about who we are, our mission, and our vision. I think importantly, our goal is better health and better care, lower costs across the Commonwealth. I think that's a goal that every state should have and does have. And our structure is unique as well. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the structure and some of the lessons learned from this. So it is an independent state agency, and I report to a board. The board is made up of 11 members who are appointed by the governor, the attorney general, and the state auditor, each of whom are independently elected constitutional officers in Massachusetts. As you can see, we did write into statute that each board member does have a specific area of expertise. And so you can see we had someone who was a primary care physician written into the law, someone who's an expert in behavioral health care, a healthcare economist, someone who can represent consumer advocates, and you can see all the different levels of expertise, really kind of spanning all of the different areas that you would want to have represented on a board like this. Notably, the board members were appointed in staggered terms in their initial term. So board members were either had a 1-year term to begin with, all the way up to 5 years, and then could be reappointed for an additional 5-year term. And the purpose of that was to really have it be so that the board is not turning over all at the same time, and it wouldn't be tied to, say, an election occurring that all of a sudden the board is turning over. It really is supposed to be kind of 1 or 2 board members, potentially a year, moving on. As you can see, no one of these constitutional officers maintains a majority of the board in their appointments. The governor has the most appointments, 5, but 6 is the voting majority. We do have 2 ex officio members who sit on the board and are voting members, our Secretary of Administration and Finance, our kind of budget office, as well as the Secretary of Health and Human Services who do sit on the board. The chair of the board is a long-term healthcare economist in Massachusetts. His name is Dr. Stuart Altman. And he really came to this with just incredible credentials and a long history of working in healthcare. And so he is the board chair by statute. And importantly, the legislature did not want to have one of those ex officio members being the board chair. So the ex officio government appointees are there as voting members, but they're not labeled in law as the board chair. We included very strong financial conflict of interest restrictions when it comes to these board members. So no board member by law can have any financial interest in the healthcare system. And as you can imagine, this created some challenge in finding appointments and people who have these different levels of expertise who are completely financially divorced from the healthcare system. Many of the board members actually, would serve on boards for hospitals or insurance companies, and some of them had to remove themselves from those boards in order to participate. One interesting kind of side note here is we had a primary care physician who is a board member, but the primary care physician could have no financial interest in the healthcare system. So that created a unique challenge, maybe an unintended consequence, because basically that meant that any practicing primary care physician would inherently have a conflict. What we ended up, we had a great board member here who was a retired pediatrician, and so that's how we kind of worked through that. So like Vermont, it was really important for us to have an independent board and not to have the board be made up of, say, the head of the hospital association or the head of the Association of Health Plans or, candidly, the head of the medical society. We wanted these board members, just like Vermont, to not be sitting there representing one specific element of the healthcare system, but really be taking that broader view about what is in the best interest. Yes, coming to the board with expertise and experience that they would lend to that, but really not there representing one particular stakeholder, but really there to represent all of the residents of the Commonwealth. The board governs through consensus. I think we've had 5 years. We just celebrated our 5-year anniversary. I think in that 5 years we've had one no vote among our board members. So it really is a place where there is a dialogue and an effort to try to find compromises and work together to advance the goals of the agency. A few other things just quickly about kind of the structure here. So the board does appoint the executive director, that's myself, and I oversee the staff and run the day-to-day operations of the organization. Recognizing, again, very similar to Vermont, that while we have this independent board, we really wanted to be able to have connections with all of these important stakeholders. So it wasn't like we didn't want the perspective of a hospital association or the medical society. And so the law set forth that the executive director could establish or should establish an advisory council that I meet with regularly. And that advisory council was given kind of broad discretion to me in terms of who I could appoint to that. I have a 32-member advisory council made up of just about every different perspective that one could imagine in healthcare. And we meet about quarterly and talk about the priorities of the organization and get input. Again, like Vermont, this board is subject to open meeting law, so we conduct all of our deliberations in public. Really important, really crucial. And just as was said before, really created a place where the public and all of the stakeholders and everyone who has an interest in there knows where the decisions are happening, knows that they can go to these board meetings, and all of our board meetings were public, and see and contribute to that decision-making process. And so transparency in how we conducted our work was extremely important and one of the strengths of why we've been able to be successful. I just did the math. In the last 5 years, we've held over 200 public meetings. That averages out to be about 3 a month. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to put on 3-hour public meetings just about every other week with 100-page PowerPoint presentations that go up on the website. And we have about, I would say, 150 to 200 people that regularly attend every single one of our meetings. In addition, we live stream all of our meetings, and all of our materials are public. To kind of manage, we do have a larger board, so it's 11 people, a little bit different than Vermont. One of the things that we did to try to have an ability to kind of deep dive on some specific policy issues is we established some subcommittees. So the board has right now 4 policy subcommittees that are made up of 5 members, so each board member is on 2 subcommittees, and they really kind of do the deeper dive on some particular policy issues, and then we'll advance them up to the full board for consideration. And that was a way that we could really have more focused conversations with a smaller number of the board members, while also still elevating it up to the board level. This is really our tools in our toolbox, and they're varied. And depending on what the issue is or the problem, we use different ones. So one is we're a researcher and reporter. As I said before, we take that data that SHIA collects. We publish an annual report about where we are in terms of our ability to hit that benchmark. How and why are we hitting this benchmark? I think one could imagine a scenario where, yes, you're able to hit that healthcare cost growth benchmark, but actually do real harm to patients or to the healthcare system. So it's important to understand why or why not we're hitting that benchmark, and to be able to use data and objective facts to be able to identify where are those opportunities to get efficiencies in this system that will provide better care and value to patients. So researcher and reporter is a big part of what we do. The second thing is a convener. We don't have all the answers in government, and so part of what we do is we bring together communities just like this and come together and say, how can we work together on some of these big challenges? And it's not coming from a situation where we're telling the healthcare market how to do this, but really let's work together. And that's a big part of how we've been able to advance our agenda. The third thing that we do is we are also a watchdog. And so sometimes we do identify market behaviors or individual organizations that are excessively contributing to healthcare spending. And that can be something where we are calling out dysfunction in many cases. And then finally, we're also a partner. We have a part of our responsibilities is actually giving money. We do grants, we do investment programs, we certify provider organizations. So we want to work together with providers to be able to meet our goals as well. I'll show you, this is just a little bit about our organizational structure, and I don't want to scare people by how many employees we have, but we're up to about 60 employees at the Health Policy Commission over the last 5 years. And the reason I don't want to scare people too much is because we do a lot of different things. We have a whole part of our organization that is certifying accountable care organizations and patient-centered medical homes. We have a whole part of our organization that is just doing grants and investments in our healthcare market. We have a part of our organization that is reviewing hospital mergers and consolidations to try to understand what their impact may be. And then, as I mentioned before, a department that's really focused on the research and identifying how we're doing versus the cost. And so to give you kind of a better sense of how this breaks out, this is kind of full payroll and consulting services among those different categories. So depending on what you want this organization to do, you can imagine that it might be much smaller than what I just showed you. And you can kind of see how those different pie slices play out in this particular, for our organization. I would also note that the Center for Health Information and Analysis, the CHIA, our sister agency, they have actually gone through a period of retrenchment in terms of their budget. So if you combine CHIA and our budget together, there has not been additional healthcare spending on those two state agencies kind of netted together. Their budget has actually gone down by about $10 million, as our budget has gone up by 8.5. So in terms of total additional spend, there hasn't been. Our spending, our budget is funded through an assessment that is levied on hospitals, ambulatory surgery centers, and health plans. And it is split up basically 50-50 between the hospitals and the health plans. And they contribute to the state basically and through an assessment collection that pays for our operations. So we are not funded by taxpayer dollars. And again, I think an important thing to consider how you set up the financing for an organization. That has allowed us to not have to kind of necessarily be worried every time that there's a budget shortfall. It provides us much more stability in terms of being able to plan a long term for our operations. And also, I think interestingly, provides an interesting connection to our hospitals and health plans. I think we kind of take it pretty serious that they're the ones paying for us. And so we better be providing value to this healthcare system. And we do think about that in terms of how we set our priorities. We're funded by the industry. So we need to be working with the industry to make sure that we hit our goals. I mentioned here, these are kind of the four big things that we do. Monitor the cost drivers in system transformation, make investments, especially into community hospitals, promote a more efficient delivery system through some of our certification programs. And unique to Massachusetts, we do have an ability to examine market acquisitions, consolidations, joint ventures, not from an antitrust perspective, but really from a public interest perspective. The academic literature is quite strong that hospital mergers can lead to higher prices, and so we have a transparent way of reviewing and making public what we think the impacts of our rapidly consolidating healthcare system will be. All right, so I'm going to show you just some results, and then I'll stop and take some Q&A. So on the top part of this graph is, you guys are all very familiar with this now. This is the CMS per capita dollar amounts. On top was 2009, we were number 1. 2014, no longer number 1. We're number 2. So we're right ahead of you in number 2. And I would note Vermont's number 4 on this list. But interestingly, it wasn't necessarily that everyone kind of caught up to us. We did have a very different spending trajectory over the last couple of years. And so here you can see that from 2009 to 14, we had the 4th lowest rate of growth in healthcare spending. Delaware grew at the 7th highest rate. So you can see our little orange bar all the way to the left there. Here's another way of looking at it. This is, again, kind of growth in total healthcare expenditures. The blue line is the United States. The orange line is Massachusetts. And you can see all throughout the 2000s, we were growing much, much faster than the United States. And really around 2010, you can see we have now consistently been growing at a much lower rate than the United States. And here's another way of looking at this, which I think is kind of interesting. This is just commercial healthcare spending. So think of your employers, your residents, their premiums. Again, orange line is Massachusetts, blue line is the United States. Since 2013, we have been markedly lower in commercial healthcare spending growth, and the delta that we have saved is $5.5 billion between the United States and our growth rates. So one last final thing I guess I would say is our challenges remain. As I mentioned before, we're still number 2, and we're a high-income state. And so sometimes people will argue, well, we're a high-income state, so what if we spend a lot of money on healthcare? Well, we looked at this as well, and this is just a graph of all the different states. And you have your income, median income on the bottom here, as well as the per capita healthcare spending on the side. And yes, there is a relationship, as you can see, between median total income and what you spend on per capita healthcare. But Delaware and Massachusetts, we are on the wrong side of that gold line. And so we definitely have our work cut out for us. So I have a ton more slides. I'm not going to go through all of it, so I'm going to stop now and open it up for questions.
Tom Trezise, as you move, I know Massachusetts is on a journey from a treatment to a wellness model, and from sort of precision treatment to precision wellness. And when you think about people then, they're going to probably consider themselves patients less than 5%, probably less than 1% of the time. So what's your strategy, your people engagement strategy of changing the conversation from patient-centric focus to consumer-centric focus?
So I think a couple of things. One, we are in the process of moving our entire Medicaid program to an ACO model where the providers will be at risk for kind of managing the budget of those populations. And we're, through the federal government, investing a lot of resources into population health strategies. And again, it's really moving the mindset away from this is my patient panel to this is my community. And what are the health needs of my community, and how can the healthcare system, how can our hospitals work much better together with community-based organizations, with other healthcare organizations that are not the acute care facility, and really also getting even further upstream and thinking about the social determinants of health. Our healthcare is not actually that big of a determinant in whether we're healthy or not. And so how do we kind of change the flow of dollars and the focus away from just kind of the institutional setting to more of this community basis? And so we are kind of at the very beginning of that journey, frankly, but one where it really is trying to kind of avoid the over-medicalization at some points of our system.
You have the...
I can take one more. Yeah. Is there anyone else? Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ann Hesky with the Healthcare Commission, and I wanted to ask you about Massachusetts is known for its medical schools and its teaching hospitals, world-class teaching hospitals, world-class public and private universities, both of which, not only if they create jobs in the healthcare sector, they create jobs in the medical device, in the pharma sector. So how are you balancing out that, look, we're a job generator, we help really grow the economy of Massachusetts, balancing that with trying to get less than 4% annual growth?
It's a great question, and really was one of the biggest tension points in putting this effort together. Healthcare is the #1 employer in Massachusetts. It is big business in Massachusetts, and as you mentioned, we have world-class institutions where people fly from all across the country to go to our institutions. That is creating all types of spillover effects in terms of research and innovation and life sciences and the biotech field. So this effort is harder than even the healthcare access effort. The healthcare access effort in Massachusetts was how do we get 500,000 people health insurance? Well, we can help them buy it, we can get them on Medicaid, and we can incentivize them to buy it. This is around a $60 billion a year industry in Massachusetts. And so it does need to be done thoughtfully and carefully, that we're not destroying or hurting one of our key strengths. And there was a lot of debate when the bill was being passed about where do you set that benchmark? Where do you set that goal? And there were some efforts who said, why would we let the healthcare system grow at 3.6%? There's all this waste in the healthcare system. We should let them say we can let them grow at 1%. There's a whole constituency, like we should set the target at 1. And as you can probably imagine, the hospitals and the medical society said, how about like 4.5%, 5%? And so it ended up coming, obviously somewhere in the middle. I would note, since the law has passed, we have not seen any impact in terms of employment or jobs. We continue to be, number one NIH state. But there is a balance, and it's one that we kind of constantly have to think about. And I think the other thing that we always talk about is great that we have this incredible, system, but it can't be at the expense of every other sector. And so if every other employer and business and resident is subsidizing this extremely expensive system, we're not going to have anything but healthcare. So it is a balancing effort for sure.
I think one last question.
It's like 1.5 questions, I guess. Was any consideration given to tying the benchmark to something other than the PGSP? And what were they? Why were they dismissed? And just if you could just quickly, with your opinion or any measures you might have, you mentioned the goal of universal access in Massachusetts. Has that been impacted at all by the fact that you're spending less than maybe you would have been otherwise?
So through our process, we had some economists who were kind of advising the legislature. So there were actually pretty good consensus early on around using that kind of economic growth rate as the foundation for the target. And as I mentioned, people wanted to say that minus 2 percentage points, that plus 2 percentage points, so there was a negotiation around it. I'm pretty actually agnostic about what you use. You could use an inflationary measure, you could use a regional measure. The important thing is just to have a target. It created this ability for everyone to work together and to have a common goal in mind. And that, just having an organizing principle, where you set it is obviously extremely important and what you tie it to, but the most important thing is just to have a goal that everyone can work towards. So I would advise not getting necessarily too caught up in what exactly the measure is that you want to use. The second, what was the second part of the question was?
Has access.
Access, yeah. So no, we continue to be the highest covered state in the country, the lowest on insurance rate. And I would mention, and I didn't show it here, but in terms of our ability to hit that benchmark, we've measured ourselves 4 years against that benchmark. First year was 2.4% growth. Second year was 4.2. Third year was 4.8. And the fourth year was 2.8. If you average all of those years out over that period of time, you get to 3.55%. So I have to go to that extra decimal point in order to hit it. But we haven't hit it every year. And I think that's okay too, as long as you kind of think of this as a long-term strategy. And the years we didn't hit it, pharmaceuticals.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
I'm sure there are more questions. I have one about the 32-member advisory board, which feels unruly to me. I want to figure out how you actually do that. But I know you need to travel, so thank you. Thanks again. We are surprisingly on schedule, so we are allowed to take a 10-minute break, and we will come back with our next speaker, Dr. Bruce Goldberg. So be back here just before 2 o'clock, and we'll get started again. Thanks, everybody. We're going to move on to our third speaker now. Before we do, I did want to recognize that beyond Secretary Walker, we do have Representative David Pence here, as well as Secretary of Finance Geisenberger joining. Thank you. Certainly appreciate state government's high level of involvement in this, especially from the governance topic. It's essential. So let me now introduce our third speaker, Dr. Bruce Goldberg, who wins the award for furthest travel to get here. Much appreciated. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. So, one, this has been great. And I think let me just echo a couple of messages even before I start. And they're the messages echoed by both Mark and David. One, there's no perfect structure. Two, you're on a journey and you're really to be commended for that. And I would just stay on that. So I'm going to give you sort of Oregon's journey and where we started, where we're going, etc. But let me first start with this. I was the director of Oregon's Health Authority. My dad reminded me that when I was a teenager in the 1960s, I did nothing but question authority and wore a button like this. And he was not in healthcare, but then he thought it was just comeuppance that I was then the director of a health authority, which he had no idea what it did. But he always then thought it was a good thing to question authority. So what I want to do is talk to you a little bit about governance and authority, Oregon style, but going to separate it out into two chunks. One, an effort we did around governance and authority of the state infrastructure, and then two, what we've done around governance and authority in the health delivery system, because a little bit different. So our environment very similar to this is 2008 when we started this. Our environment was long history of health reform dating back to the early 1990s, but yet healthcare costs rising faster than any other economic indicator, really starving out public dollars from other public purposes. And then the other issue that you've heard about was quality being pretty random. I mean, I usually show a scatter plot of healthcare quality indicators, and you can take that to any state, any community, that we have no consistency in quality and in delivery. And we had a belief that we could do better, that we really could. And we felt that we could do that in a couple of ways. One was to harness the state's efforts at purchasing. I talked about not a lot of consistency. Well, we were some of our own worst enemies. We as a state purchased health care for Medicaid, for public employees, for teachers. We purchased mental health and behavioral health services. We purchased public health services. And we did that in an inconsistent way, with a confusing process, multiple standards, and felt that by consolidating purchasing, we could, A, improve value for the state, and B, we could begin to use that purchasing power to drive changes in the delivery system. The state purchases for somewhere between 30 and 40% of the people in the state. That includes educators and their families, public employees and their families, Medicaid, a whole variety of others. And in fact, in some towns, like Salem, our state capital, where there's a large number of public employees, The state purchased health care for over half of the people in Salem, but we did that in a really haphazard way. So one thing was use the purchasing power of the state to align things, be a better purchaser, which many in our delivery systems really liked. If you're a physician or a hospital and you're contracting with 60, 70 payers, all of whom have a whole variety of standards around quality and delivery of care, it's no wonder we have large infrastructures, tremendous amount of missed opportunities to consolidate some of what we do. We created a health policy board for oversight of this and for policy development. And at the same time, we established some of the mechanisms for insurance rate review, although that was a bit of an aside in the effort that we were doing. We looked to take not a regulatory approach, but a purchasing and a policy and a data approach, as you'll see. And our goal was really begin with Medicaid, get our house in order in terms of how we purchase care in Medicaid, and then begin to expand that into purchasing for public employees, teachers, and others, and then looking to extend out into the commercial market. If you read the bill that established this, House Bill 2009, there's a link at the end of this. This was in 2008, 2009. We actually anticipated a state-run insurance exchange, much like happened nationally. So we created, as a part of this, one was the Oregon Health Authority. We had a very large state agency, much like you have, a Department of Human Services, that was all-encompassing. It did everything from child welfare and senior protective services, at the time food stamps, now SNAP, to Medicaid purchasing, mental health, public health, you name it. Huge span of responsibility, 11,000 employees, child welfare workers, et cetera, and a lot of very different missions. So we created a new agency, the Oregon Health Authority, that consolidated all of the health programs from the Department of Human Services, Medicaid, public health, all of the behavioral health, mental health, substance abuse, public health purchasing, and also took from other parts of state government the purchasing for public employees, for teachers, and for a variety of, at the time, what were smaller healthcare programs that the state run, and put that into one agency. It was overseen by a health policy board. And the charge to the Oregon Health Authority was to begin to develop uniform contracting and quality standards for the state, to run all of these programs, to establish evidence-based guidelines for care, to have consistent health policy development for the state, and to coordinate the state's analytic and policy support. A lot of that analysis and policy was being done in a variety of different agencies, and the whole idea was to consolidate everything. We also established a board to oversee this. Much of the same discussion as you heard Mark and David talk about. Is this going to be a Noah's Ark, meaning representative, one from each species in the healthcare world? A doctor, a hospital, you can go on and on and on. Or was it going to be, a group that wasn't representative, but that really established a broader look at the state? We landed, so you heard 5, you heard 11, we're at 9. There is no magic number. We landed at 9. These people are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. The only mandates on it were a couple. There needed to be one person from each of our 5 congressional districts, which really looked at geographic being certain that the board had a large geographic diversity. We're a really big state. I think our state is the size of New England. And we have a pretty big urban-rural divide. We've got a frontier part of our state where we have one of the last few public boarding schools, because kids travel an hour to go to public school. And then we have, Portland, Oregon. So that was to establish some geographic diversity, and it just mandated one practicing physician to be on the board. And then there's a list. This is consolidated. In the establishing legislation, there's about a list of 20 or 30 functions that have all of the same buzzwords you and I have all heard today about value-based purchasing, contracting, lowering healthcare costs, access, public health, you name it. It really boiled down to the group being the policy-making body for the health authority, developing a plan for affordable quality care for all Oregonians, establishing statewide healthcare quality standards. That was really key to what we were looking to do. Looking at establishing cost containment mechanisms, and we'll get at that in a second, and assure a sufficient healthcare workforce. Those were the key charges to the Health Policy Board. The authority of the board, well, now we get into, do you have authority or influence? And what is real authority? When you look at state government, the real authority generally is around a governor and a legislature. In our state, we talk about it as 16, 31, and 1. We have 60 in our House. You need 31 votes to pass something. We have 30 in our Senate. You need 16. And then we have a governor who needs to sign a bill. And ultimately, that's where the authority is. But there's a lot that can happen, and you heard about that through both examples, through how you establish that influence. And to talk a little bit about that. The policy board has the authority to submit legislation, which is somewhat unique, but ultimately you need 16, 31, and 1. And they can organize and oversee the work of the Oregon Health Authority. This was in some ways a big effort in restructuring state government. At least that's what we thought going into it. It turned out to be, as in our political parlance today, a bit of a nothing burger in terms of how we did that. We had 2 years to transition, and we took care of that by setting a couple of parameters. Number one, there were no additional FTE that were put to this. There was a lot of concern that when you established 2 agencies out of 1, that you would now, what was it going to be that you had two directors, a director of DHS and a director of the Health Authority, and all these other things. Well, we actually found that as we went through this, we mapped all of the employees, all of their functions, and to be honest, we found a fair amount of ability to consolidate and to actually reduce some positions as we really diligently mapped this out. We had a 2-year time frame to do this transition. I think that the wisdom of our governor really helped, which was I was the director of the Department of Human Services. He had me share the role of both director of the new Health Authority and director of the Department of Human Services during that 2-year transition to avoid what he called bickering bureaucrats, which was really appropriate. So we were able to do that. We have a 2-year budget cycle. We took 2 years to transition the agencies. It actually went, as I indicated, pretty smoothly. The 2 agencies still share a fair amount of administrative infrastructure. As one agency, we shared the same telephone system and IT system, and HR and some of those administrative functions, and we simply decided to continue that and to have a shared administrative infrastructure, which we set out some clear charters around governance and how that would work. And in a lot of ways, the agencies ended up running probably a lot more smoothly at the end of that transition than they had been at the beginning, primarily because there was a tremendous consolidation of missions, certainly on the healthcare side, and as well as on the human services side. As I indicated, this was done without any additional staffing, mapped out all of the staff, and was able to move forward. And now this is how our structure looks. We had a huge Department of Human Services. Now we have a health authority with Medicaid, public health, behavioral health, purchasing for employees and teachers, a variety of other health purchasing programs, and a consolidated policy and analytic structure that runs an all-payer, all-claims database, etc. We have a Department of Human Services overseeing the health authority by the Health Policy Board, the governor, and the legislature. We have a Department of Consumer and Business Affairs, where insurance functions of the state are run. We don't have an elected insurance commissioner. It's the director of the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. And that group does some commercial health insurance rate review, which has gotten some notoriety nationally, but again, that's overseen by a separate agency. Advantages, disadvantages, I think consistent health policy direction for a state is something that was welcomed by, I think, a lot of stakeholders. There was a single point of accountability for health and for healthcare purchasing from the state's perspective, and a place where you could really focus a state's effort on whatever goal you want, whether it's better health, quality, access, etc. An ability to leverage a fair amount of the state's purchasing to promote better value, both for the state's purchasing as well as, I would say, better value for the delivery system, to not march to multiple drummers. Greater efficiency in the delivery of care. Certainly some consolidated efforts around data analysis, policy, and technical support. And lastly, a consistent platform for multi-payer efforts. And then as we did this, we had a sudden environmental catastrophe. That catastrophe was the Great Recession, where we had set up this infrastructure, we were ready to move forward, and state revenues dropped 30% in like a day. The need for Medicaid services increased dramatically the same day as people lost employment. Healthcare costs were continuing to rise. I mean, it was really a catastrophe. And we looked at how states deal with this. And states in the private sector, pretty much all of us, deal with rising healthcare costs in the same way. We're just, some of us, a little more subtle about it. Number one, we cut people from care. States are good at that. We threw 100,000 people off our Medicaid rolls overnight because our state budget plummeted. But businesses do that as well. When I came to Oregon, pretty much every business offered fully paid family health insurance. Nowadays, businesses, it's pretty rare. The worker may get covered, but hourly workers have to pay $300 or $400 for family coverage, and they can't afford it. So they were ostensibly cut from care as well. We cut services and benefits. States do that. We all talk about what covered benefits we have. And the last thing we do is we cut payments, or we shift payments. We either cut what we pay providers, or we shift the share of that from, now I'll only pay 70% and the consumer is going to pay 30%. And we have used these same tools in public and private sector for probably since all of us were born. And I would say, what effect has that had? Have we lowered healthcare costs? No. Have we really seen the kind of dramatic improvements in consistency and quality? No. So we felt we had to do something different. That dealing with this catastrophe meant we just had to do something different. And that was to create a fourth path. Rather than cutting rates and cutting people and cutting benefits and doing all those crazy machinations that drive all of us crazy, we wanted to figure out how to get at the root of how care is delivered, to fundamentally change how care is delivered, to be able to reduce waste, improve health, get at all the things we want to do, pay for performance, etc. This is waste in healthcare. We all know this. This is Don Berwick. Anywhere between 25 and 50% of our healthcare dollar is wasted. You can take whatever number you want. If it's 5%, it's still too much. We also know that a lot of what we contributes to our health, and I always lose my doctor union card when I say this. It's not about the doctor or hospital we go to. What contributes more to our health is our zip code, it's our social environment, it's what we eat, it's what we drink, it's what we smoke, it's what we shouldn't smoke. Social factors are a lot more about our health and our health status than our medical care. Yet, about 10% is medical care, but that's where 99.9% of the dollars go. So how do you start to focus on some of all these things? And this is where everyone goes, yeah, great, Bruce, but what does changing how care is delivered look like? And let me just tell you a quick story, because this, I think, exemplifies what changing care looks like. This is Malik. Malik is a 12-year-old boy, and he's got asthma. And Malik was going to the emergency room every month. Now, Malik had really good health insurance. He had a really great pulmonologist. He got every new medicine that had a Z and X and a Y in the name. I mean, he had it all. But he would keep going to the emergency room every month until he got enrolled in a new community-based program where we sent a community health worker out to his house. They helped look at what was causing Malik to wheeze. They actually removed some carpets from his house, helped the family pay for some new carpets, bought the family one of these new HEPA vacs that get all the dust out of the room, taught his family better how to use all these great medicines he was taking. And a year later, Malik was not in the emergency department once. Now, think about that for a second. I'm a family doc. I've taken care of thousands of Maliks. No one pays me for a community health worker. In fact, community health workers, when we started this, you can't even pay them. They didn't have a code to be able to pay them. In fact, I got perversely paid more. I mean, I got paid every time Malik was sick. I didn't get paid when Malik was well. So think for a minute how things would look differently if the charge was no child should ever have to go to the emergency room with an acute asthma attack. And that sort of is what changing care delivery is about. How do you create a system where we all work together to keep Malik out of the emergency room? And that means really thinking differently. It's not about having a system that pays for office visits. Or it's how do you start to create a structure where you have community health workers, you look at illness and prevention and community health in a whole different way. So to do that, we created coordinated care organizations. It was our belief that all healthcare is local, that you could draw a circle around a community, and it's about the people, the hospitals, the doctors, it's about everybody in that community. And how do you bring them together to do exactly this? So we created the coordinated care model. It's got 5 tenets. I'm going to talk very briefly about a couple because they're germane for today. Local accountability and governance, a global budget, integrated and coordinated care, quality metrics, and flexibility. So we created these new organizations called CCOs to deliver care in our Medicaid population. The whole idea was to create a new community-based organization that was governed by partnership between the three entities we felt were important to improve healthcare. Those taking financial risk, those who provide the care, the major components of the healthcare system, and consumers. So governance of these new CCOs had to include that. We went through every machination, same thing about Noah's Ark, big, small, little, whatever. We left it blank. And that was in the contracting process. The organization had to meet, in essence, the Supreme Court definition of pornography. You know it when you see it. We knew it when we saw it, when the governance really represented risk takers, components of the healthcare system, and the community. These organizations got a global budget. And sort of little similar to what Massachusetts did, a different flavor. These were Medicaid managed care organizations in essence, but with a new governance style. They were given a budget that grows at 3.4% per capita a year. Why 3.4%? Isn't it interesting? Massachusetts at 3.6. We're at 3.4. We looked at what state revenues were supposed to grow over a 10-year period. And guess what? Just like Massachusetts, it was 3.4%. And we wanted to bring our Medicaid per capita spend in line with what state revenues would look like so that we could sustain our state's Medicaid program. Nationally at the time, Medicaid was supposed to grow at 5.5%. So this was really an effort to bend the cost curve by 2%. And then, you know, the easiest way to meet any kind of cost target is just not to deliver care. So what we chose to do was not just to give a budget, but to link it to a series of quality standards, and to have initially 3% of that budget, now it's 4.6% of that budget, paid out at based on how you do with quality. So we're running out of time. We got a waiver to do this from the feds. We also, at that time, got some money. We got about $1.9 billion. But the interesting thing about that is over the course of our 5-year waiver, we repaid every penny of that to the feds in terms of our lowered costs. And now Oregon's on track to that delta that David showed, saving about $2 billion of state funds over 10 years in our Medicaid program without cutting people, cutting payments, et cetera. We've seen incredible progress. We report on the finances and the quality. This is one look at a public report. Just to give you a sense, we've seen all-cause readmissions go down 18% in the 4 years since we started this. Emergency department visits for avoidable outpatient treated things, 21%. We've seen dental sealants go up 92% in kids. 80% of people in our Medicaid program now are in a patient-centered primary care home. A lot of ways we've seen better value. You can't throw a stone in our state and not hit a community health worker now. It's pretty amazing. We've seen incredible collaboration between different parts of our healthcare industry, a lot less fighting. So let me just spend the last couple minutes with some key lessons learned. First lesson learned, there is no perfect structure. But staffing is really appropriate. And you can't run a multi-billion-dollar healthcare endeavor with staff who are used to running a social service agency. I think there's a real disconnect between state staff who historically have been folks who have run social service programs, and the kind of knowledge and expertise of healthcare and the delivery system that you need to run a complex healthcare endeavor. Your Medicaid agency, our Medicaid agency, I mean, these are multi-billion-dollar, large, complex healthcare delivery systems, and you need knowledge and expertise to run them. And I've run organizations on the private sector side that contracted with the state, and it infuriated me, and it infuriated me when I worked with the state to not be able to have the kind of staff, and we eventually needed to grow that. You need some authority, but influence is key. We had hundreds of community stakeholder meetings where we sought to build consensus for what we were doing, and you've got to do that both in community meetings and meeting individually, one-on-one, with insurance executives, hospital leaders, consumers, etc. That was what our governor and myself did pretty much every day. A common vision and leadership are key. Everybody needs to buy into where you're going as a state. Everybody meaning your executive branch, your governor, the agency, the legislature, all of the stakeholders that you have, the industry, hospitals, doctors, consumers, etc. And when I say buy-in to a vision, buy-in needs to be buy-in. Buy-in can't be everybody nods heads at these nice community meetings and then goes off and undermines things when they go home. And we've all seen that happen. There needs to be a common vision, and stakeholders need to be engaged, and everyone has to understand not everyone ends up getting what they want. Government agency work has to be changed. People can't see in the healthcare side that they can't see efforts at quality, value, all the health reform things as being an add-on. They actually need to be the work of the agency. Payment reform is critical. If you don't change how you pay, you're never going to get there. Multi-payer initiatives are really key. You heard that earlier today. If you're going to make things different, though, you need to help organizations transition. If we're going to save money because we're going to reduce emergency department visits by 20%, well, where do you think that money comes from? It comes from hospitals. So how are you going to help hospitals transition to a different state healthcare model of delivery whereby they're not actually penalized if emergency department visits get reduced? Data and analysis needs to be reliable and trusted. People have to trust the data. That means being transparent about it, and until you get that data right and until it's trusted, it's really hard to move forward. Communication, I just can't stress enough. And the last is, there's a Yogi Berra quote. He said, it could be something like, if the other team wins, it'll be a problem for us. He was right, and that's about Medicare. Never forget Medicare. Medicare is like 50% of your healthcare spend. And so it's great to be doing all this, but unless you're playing with the other teams, Medicare, that's really hard. And don't forget politics also. That under all of this is a political environment. And you can't ever get away from the politics of all this. And that gets us back to community process like you're doing. It gets back to leadership like you have in this state. Those are the keys to doing this. So thank you.
We do have time for a couple of questions. I can start off with one. I was interested in finding out, both in Vermont and Massachusetts, there were particular structures in place, such as really long terms for that board of governors, and also distinct funding streams outside of the state budget that allowed that not to be a politically charged environment or variable over time. Is there anything?
Yeah, well, little different. 4-year terms appointed by the governor. The staffing and dollars that go to support the board comes from the Oregon Health Authority. So it's state funding that does that. In essence, as you saw, the board has the ability to oversee and reorganize the agency. And so if they're not getting what they need, they can, within that line between authority and influence, start to get things changed.
Steve, do the microphone.
Thank you, Bruce. Really appreciate this. I'm curious in terms of you went through the Medicaid transformation, which was amazing. But in terms of the having state employees as well as Medicaid and other purchasing authority and responsibility, particularly in the state employee side, I was wondering if you could just comment on that.
Yeah, it's great. So authority and influence. The goal was to purchase it in the same way. State employees, when they see a reduction in their healthcare spend, see that as a takeaway at the negotiating table. So they didn't want to be put into these coordinated care organizations. And what we've come to has been really interesting, has been we've set the same targets for our contracts for public employees. We want bidders that will agree to bring costs in at 3.4% a year growth per capita. And we have the same quality standards now in those contracts as we do in Medicaid. But that was a hard road to hoe. With one of our unions, it was really interesting. What we were able to do was when we showed them how much we could save in healthcare costs, they were concerned because all that money then ends up going to pave roads. And so at bargaining, they were able to negotiate if they met certain healthcare targets, they got a cost of living increase sooner than they would have if they didn't. So in essence, it was a way to start to share some of the savings with that. But anyone who's negotiated some of those contracts, those are tough.
Question. A question about Medicaid populations. You divide it into subpopulations, like the big population of mental health and substance abuse, and the aging population. Did you do anything like that, and to have the community health workers work in those populations?
Yeah, thanks for that question, because I skipped over that pretty quickly. But we consolidated part of the health authority, and part of what we did in Medicaid was consolidate those funding streams so that the coordinated care organizations get the physical health, mental health, oral health, and a variety of other Medicaid-funded public health streams that probably only state bureaucrats know about, that have long acronyms. But the goal was to really integrate particularly behavioral health and behavioral health, mental health, substance abuse, and physical health. And indeed, a lot of what we've seen has been tremendous integration of that, as well as oral health. I mean, we knew in our state that we had a lot of emergency department visits being paid for by health plans because people didn't have access to dental care. I mean, the issue is really starting to look at things differently, and putting those funding streams together is really key. Although not loved by everybody.
Yeah.
Hi. I had a question about when you talked about the Medicaid waiver. At what point in this process did that come through, and for how long, and what's the current status?
We got a waiver in 2011. It was a 5-year waiver. It's now expired and renewed for another 5 years. The first waiver basically gave us authority to change how we deliver care in Medicaid, to put people in a CCO. we were at risk with the feds. We said we would keep spending at 3.4%. If we didn't, we owed a penalty to the feds. And we also said we would improve care, and we would pay a penalty if we didn't. And we got $1.9 billion. The renewal, interestingly, kept the penalties, but we didn't get any more money for the next 5 years. But the states felt that this is a model that's been working really well.
Was that 1.6 for 1 year or?
1.9. The money was over 5 years.
Dan Elliott from Christiana Care and the eBright Health ACO. As you get into the CCOs, could you just help flesh out so I can understand what is the work that's happening there? You know, the generalities of the stakeholder being engaged and the sort of purchasing streams coming together. That all makes sense. And what does that work look like? And what were some of the characteristics of successful CCOs potentially compared to other ones that didn't perform so well?
Yeah. So you've got to think about CCO, great term. To be honest, they're Medicaid managed care organizations. They and I just say that part of me bristles at saying that because they're not. They're something new, but they really are. They get a PMPM capitation. They pay for the care. They're at risk for the quality standards. What's different about them that makes it really different from Medicaid managed care, I believe, well, two things. One is the governance. We have a long history of Medicaid managed care in our state. It was one of three flavors. We either had Medicaid managed care run by doctors that paid doctors well and everyone else poorly. We had Medicaid managed care that was run by hospitals, which either paid hospitals well and paid doctors poorly. And then we had commercially run plans that paid themselves well and didn't pay anybody else. And so this is new in terms of these organizations are actually governed by a partnership of the risk takers, the deliverers, and the recipients of care. So if someone asks, you got a 3.5% a year increase, and you want to get paid 10% more, where does that come from? And that discussion happens at the CCO level. But they really are, if you think about what they are operationally, all the same functions as a managed care organization. They just have they don't have insurance licenses, they do have to have reserves. They have a little bit of a different regulatory structure.
We have time for one more.
Thank you for talking about the social determinants of health, and these forums have actually been hearing about that a lot. And your story about Malik was terrific. So my question is, how do you think that approach? Are folks doing more of that? Do you think that's accelerating? What other approaches will occur? And what's next on this front?
It's been fantastic. Now, having said that, it's been a great start. It depends whether you're a glass half empty or a glass half full person. I personally think it's been a great start. We have CCOs investing in paying for housing for people who have mental illness because they know that the best way to, actually it's not the medicines you take, it's to have stable housing and a job. We have CCOs paying for workforce training for people. We have a lot of investments in a number of social determinants. It's been, now having said that, it's been a great start. And this is probably a whole nother talk about this, but the ability then to use Medicaid funds to do some of that creates an incredible fight with the feds. But we're doing it. There's a lot more to get done. We'll get there eventually.
So don't go too far. I'm going to give my final question to Steve.
Okay. Well, actually, you answered it in a way. You know that Medicaid has been very resistant in paying for a lot of the social determinants of health or some other. So I was wondering what mechanism you use through the CCO that allows them to pay for those kind of services? Is it coming from their admin or their savings or whatever?
So this gets into the arcane bureaucracy of Medicaid. If y'all can't sleep, you should read some of the Medicaid regs. And not only arcane, well, don't get me started. How do you have a system where you know that housing is the best way to improve someone's mental health and it won't help you pay for it? I mean, that's just crazy. So having said that, your expenditures have to be administrative or medical expenditures. And none of the CCOs wanted to have all these social investments on their admin ledger, because then everyone would say, oh, look at that bad CCO, they're spending 20% of their money on admin, isn't that terrible? So we created a third category. 2 isn't enough, so now we had 3, which is not medical and not administrative, but it's called health-related services. And that's where we were able to thread a needle with our federal counterparts who have pins, not needles if you're sore, to be able to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. That was excellent. Got to finish up a great day of speakers with a great one. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for your questions. We're going to finish up with some words from Secretary Walker.
Thank you so much. It really is just a privilege and an opportunity to stand here before all of you and all of you online with 3 fantastic speakers and perspectives. This is a journey for us, and I know that we can take on this challenge and do it better. I want to thank the Medical Society of Delaware for hosting us in this wonderful meeting location. I want to thank Delaware Center for Health Innovation for their leadership and ongoing commitment to really moving the state forward, and to Matt for moderating today's session. I want to thank our leaders across the state who have participated and joined us in this journey, and to our special guests, Secretary of Finance Rick Geisenberger, and to Representative David Benz for being here and representing leadership in healthcare in our state. I just am so appreciative of all the work that we're collectively doing. I hope that many of you will take the opportunity to share public comments in our white paper that's posted on the website. Give us your input, give us your feedback. It won't be the last time we ask for it, so please keep sending us your thoughts about how we should approach all the different aspects of implementing the healthcare benchmark in our state. So thank you for joining us. I look forward to talking soon.